Jonathan Roumie was being compelled to leave a Hollywood restaurant by a furious proprietor who had no inkling what had precipitated the situation. The beloved actor who brought Jesus to life in The Chosen remained composed as the man bellowed at him to vacate the premises, while stunned patrons beheld the inconceivable transpire. What could he have done to elicit such hostility from this owner? Yet what unfolded next would dismantle everything he believed about power, control, and the transformative force of grace. Within 30 minutes, this very proprietor would be on his knees, weeping and pleading for forgiveness from the man he had publicly humiliated before dozens of witnesses. The transformation was so profound and unforeseen that it would be captured on video and disseminated millions of times worldwide. This is the story of how an act of radical grace transmuted a moment of hatred into an unanticipated miracle, proving that true change arises not from confrontation, but from genuine understanding. 30 minutes prior, Jonathan had merely stepped into the Sunset Bistro, seeking a serene repast after filming in downtown Hollywood. The Californian sun was descending behind the iconic edifices, painting the sky in golden hues that seemed to bless the impending night. Rebecca, the hostess, seated him at a window-side table where he could observe the uninterrupted bustle of the city of dreams. It was then that he noticed a distressed woman seated alone in the restaurant's darkest corner, virtually concealed in the shadows as if attempting to become imperceptible. Sarah Thompson, 45, had clearly been unhoused for some time. Her clothes were not merely soiled but tattered in multiple places, revealing layers of fabric she had amassed to ward off the chill of the Californian nights. Her gray hair was disheveled and matted, and she exuded the distinctive odor of someone who had lacked access to bathing for weeks. Her visibly trembling hands clutched a glass of water she had managed to procure, and she gazed at the menu with an expression of hope commingled with despair. What Jonathan did not know was that Sarah had been an elementary school teacher for 20 years before a cascade of personal tragedies, divorce, severe depression, and job loss, rendered her homeless. She still carried a crumpled photograph of her former students in her pocket, a poignant reminder of her former self. Jonathan keenly observed how other patrons deliberately averted their gaze from her, some even relocating to distance themselves further. A family with young children abruptly rose and requested to be reseated upon noticing her presence. The maître d' discreetly attempted to suggest she might perhaps find a more suitable locale, yet she had merely implored for a few moments of warmth and a glass of water. Each rejection cut deeper into her already wounded spirit, reinforcing the cruel narrative society had imprinted upon her mind, that she was worthless, undeserving of even occupying the same space as normal individuals. Without hesitation, Jonathan rose from his elegant table and approached her, completely disregarding the disapproving glances of the other patrons. His approach was gentle, respectful, devoid of any trace of superiority or condescension. "Forgive my intrusion," Jonathan said in his characteristically gentle voice, "but I noticed you've been perusing the menu for a while. May I assist you in selecting something?" Sarah slowly lifted her gaze as if unable to fathom that someone was actually speaking to her. Her blue eyes, though weary and etched with the telltale signs of inadequate sleep, glimmered with a spark of hope that had nearly been extinguished completely. I have no funds for food," she whispered, her voice hoarse from such a prolonged absence of proper conversation. "I merely wish for a place to sit for a few minutes, to escape the chill outside." Jonathan smiled with the same genuine warmth that had captivated millions of viewers worldwide. "How about I cover a full meal for you? Everyone deserves wholesome sustenance and a moment of dignity." The words struck Sarah like a beam of sunlight piercing through dark clouds. It had been months since she had heard someone speak to her as if she possessed inherent human worth. Tears began to well up in her eyes, not from shame, but from pure gratitude. Across the restaurant, 52-year-old Robert Bob Mitchell observed this interaction with escalating irritation that swiftly morphed into outright fury. He had meticulously cultivated Sunset Bistro as an upscale establishment, frequented by Hollywood celebrities, studio executives, and affluent tourists who could afford the premium pricing. Bob grew up in a lower-middle-class family in Ohio, and his entire adult life had been dedicated to escaping those humble beginnings. He viewed success through the lens of prestige and exclusivity, convinced that his personal worth was directly tied to the caliber of patrons frequenting his establishment. For the past 8 years since opening the restaurant, he had toiled relentlessly to uphold an unblemished reputation. Every detail was meticulously orchestrated, from the subdued lighting that crafted the perfect ambiance to the discreet musical selection that never intruded upon the weighty conversations unfolding at his tables. Bob prided himself on cultivating an environment where persons of import could dine undisturbed by undesirable elements, a term he reserved for anyone who failed to conform to his exacting vision of sophistication. He had noted the unkempt woman entering an hour prior, yet presumed she would merely request water and depart swiftly. The fact that she had lingered and was now being attended to by a clearly affluent patron posed a direct threat to his establishment's meticulously cultivated image. In his classism-warped mind, her very presence could contaminate the experience of other discerning clientele. Adjusting his costly Italian silk tie, a sartorial symbol of status he wore as armor against his deep-seated insecurities, Bob began to stride towards the corner of the restaurant. His bespoke leather shoes tapped against the marble flooring with the resolute cadence of one accustomed to having his authority unquestioningly respected. "Excuse me, sir," Bob enunciated, his voice meticulously controlled yet laden with an underlying tension. "I need a word with you concerning the situation here." Jonathan looked up with genuine perplexity, his brown eyes searching for comprehension in the proprietor's taut face. "Certainly. Is there a particular issue?" Bob cast a thinly veiled look of disdain toward Sarah, who instinctively recoiled in her chair like a wounded animal. Years of rejection had conditioned her to anticipate the worst in every social interaction. "This establishment upholds certain standards, sir," Bob stated, each word precisely chosen to sound professional while delivering his cruel message. "We cannot permit individuals in certain circumstances negatively impact the experience of our other distinguished patrons." The surrounding tables gradually fell silent, like ripples spreading across a tranquil pond. The restaurant's previously relaxed atmosphere grew heavy with anticipation, as if everyone could sense that something significant was about to unfold. Rebecca Martinez, the 28-year-old hostess, who was also pursuing a degree in social work at UCLA, watched from her station near the entrance with increasing unease. She had grown up in a Mexican-American family where hospitality was held sacred, where refusing aid to someone in need was seen as a transgression of humanity's fundamental values. Witnessing someone being humiliated simply for their economic circumstances made her stomach churn. She thought of her own grandmother who used to say, "Mija, when you feed a hungry stranger, you might be feeding an angel unaware." "Sir," Jonathan replied with the composure that characterized his approach to difficult situations, "I understand your concern about maintaining a pleasant ambiance, but this lady simply needs a meal. I've offered to pay for it in full, including a generous gratuity." Jonathan's rational response only exacerbated Bob's annoyance, who was accustomed to having his suggestions accepted without question. "It's not simply a matter of payment, sir. It's a matter of social decorum and appropriate atmosphere. People like her do not belong in an establishment of this caliber." Sarah tried to rise, her hands trembling even more violently. I can leave right now," she murmured, tears of shame beginning to well in her tired eyes. "I don't want to cause trouble for anyone." "No," Jonathan said with gentle resolve, placing a protective yet respectful hand on her arm. "You don't need to go anywhere. You have as much right to be here as anyone else." What Bob didn't know was that Jonathan had begun that day serving breakfast at a homeless shelter in downtown Los Angeles. He had heard dozens of stories from men and women society had cast aside. War veterans battling PTSD, single mothers who had lost their jobs, elderly individuals whose families had abandoned them. Each story had profoundly touched his heart, reminding him of the parables he depicted in The Chosen, where Jesus consistently chose the marginalized, the rejected, the forgotten. His heart still swelled with those encounters, and witnessing Sarah being treated with such disdain ignited in him a quiet yet unyielding resolve. There was something more profound unfolding here than a mere disagreement over restaurant policy. It was a moment where two fundamentally divergent worldviews were colliding, one predicated on exclusion and status, the other on inclusion and human dignity. "Sir," Bob stated, his voice escalating slightly as he sensed his control of the situation faltering, "I will have to firmly insist. This individual's presence is causing visible discomfort to other patrons." "What specific discomfort?" Jonathan inquired, his gaze sweeping the restaurant with eyes that truly saw. "She is sitting quietly, bothering no one, making no disturbance. What exactly about her presence is problematic beyond her appearance?" Pastor Michael Davis, 42, dining alone at a nearby table while reviewing his Sunday sermon, observed the situation with growing fascination and concern. As the leader of a progressive Baptist church in downtown Hollywood, he had dedicated 15 years of his life to serving the city's underserved. Something about the young man's patient and gracious response in the face of escalating hostility struck him as profoundly familiar, vividly reminding him of the biblical narratives he preached every Sunday. The way the stranger championed the woman's dignity without assailing her accuser echoed the techniques Jesus employed to confound his critics with love rather than arguments. Michael felt his pastor's heart stir, recognizing that he was witnessing something that transcended a mere restaurant dispute. It was a moment where the kingdom of God was manifesting in a secular setting through the actions of someone who clearly understood the true meaning of loving one's neighbor. "Sir," Bob declared, his patience utterly depleted and his professional facade beginning to crack, "if you cannot comprehend and adhere to our established policies regarding appropriate conduct, perhaps this is not the right place for you either." The threat hung in the air like toxic smoke, heavy and unmistakable. The restaurant fell into a profound silence, every fork suspended mid-air on its journey to a mouth, all conversations abruptly ceased, and every gaze riveted on the confrontation unfolding like a Shakespearean drama. James Wilson, a 47-year-old studio executive dining alone while reviewing scripts, felt a profound stirring within his chest, a recollection of values he had shed in his ascent to Hollywood success. In recent years, he had grown progressively more cynical about human nature, but this stranger's grace in the face of blatant injustice reminded him of the man he once was before the industry had hardened his heart. Jonathan briefly closed his eyes, not in defeat or frustration, but in silent prayer, seeking divine wisdom to respond with love rather than defensiveness. When he opened them again, his expression held a peace that seemed to emanate outwards like a gentle light, touching all who observed him. "I understand your position and respect your authority as the proprietor," Jonathan said, rising gracefully with the natural fluidity that had made him perfect for portraying Christ. "But sometimes the most important thing we can do as human beings is simply to show compassion to someone who is suffering, regardless of how it impacts our personal conveniences." His words resonated with a quiet authority that prompted several nearby patrons to subtly nod in agreement, while Bob felt his control over the situation evaporating like morning mist. "Very well," Bob announced loudly enough for the entire restaurant to hear. "If the two of you cannot and will not abide by the established rules of this establishment, then I will formally have to ask you to leave immediately." An audible gasp of shock and disapproval rippled through several tables. Sarah began to weep silently, profoundly mortified to have caused such a scene for someone who had merely tried to be kind to her. Jonathan knelt gracefully beside her chair, speaking in a low voice yet clear enough for nearby tables to hear every word. "Sarah, would you mind if I offered a quick prayer for your evening and for the blessing that is to come?" The request was so unexpected, so genuinely simple and devoid of any theatricality, that it caused Bob to halt abruptly mid-motion in his attempt to escort them out. The gesture was utterly devoid of performativity. It was pure, authentic spirituality, manifesting with unforced naturalness. The entire restaurant seemed to collectively hold its breath as Jonathan bowed his head, gently closed his eyes, and began to speak in a voice imbued with the same tenderness that had captivated millions. "Heavenly Father, thank you for this sacred moment of connection. Thank you for the opportunity to meet Sarah today and for her reminding me of your presence in the most unexpected places. Bless this woman with the profound assurance that she is loved, valued, and truly seen by you." His words flowed like cool water over parched earth, each phrase laden with unreserved sincerity. "Thank you for the inherent dignity you have bestowed upon every person created in your image. Help us all to perceive through your eyes, eyes that discern beyond external appearances to the eternal heart residing within each of us." Sarah began to weep silently, not from embarrassment, but from a gratitude so profound it seemed to emanate from a place she had forgotten existed. And Lord, bless also those who are witnessing this moment. May this evening serve as a potent reminder that your love knows no boundaries, makes no distinctions based on status or outward appearance. May we all learn to love as you love, unconditionally, sacrificially, transformatively. The prayer continued for several more moments, each word meticulously chosen, not to impress the onlookers, but to honor both Sarah and the God who created her. When Jonathan finally uttered "Amen" in a soft voice, a sacred silence enveloped the entire restaurant. Bob remained utterly transfixed, observing this profound demonstration of genuine spirituality within his carefully curated and secular environment. Something profound within his professional armor and personal defenses began to fissure, like ice under the spring thaw. As Jonathan concluded the prayer and gently squeezed Sarah's hand with a tenderness that bespoke genuine care, several surrounding patrons had tears in their eyes, deeply moved by witnessing authentic faith manifest in compassionate action. Jonathan gathered his belongings with the same quiet grace and dignity he had demonstrated throughout the entire remarkable encounter. He helped Sarah to her feet with the tenderness of someone assisting a family member. And as they slowly made their way towards the door, he paused to offer heartfelt words of encouragement to other patrons who appeared visibly moved by what they had witnessed. His presence seemed to leave a trail of light in its wake, as though his brief time in the restaurant had sown seeds of kindness that were already beginning to germinate in people's hearts. At the door, Rebecca took a courageous step forward, knowing her words could cost her job, yet feeling compelled by her conscience. "Sir," she said in little more than a whisper, yet with the force of conviction, "what you did tonight was right. Sometimes kindness and human dignity are more important than any business rule." Jonathan smiled at her with the same radiant warmth he had shown Sarah, recognizing in her youthful face the moral courage required to speak truth to authority, even when it entailed personal risk. Outside, beneath the brilliant Hollywood lights that painted the sidewalk in golden hues, Pastor Michael rose abruptly from his table, leaving his dinner half-eaten. He had recognized something profoundly special in the young man's response to the persecution. The same grace under pressure he had spent decades trying to teach his congregation to discern in biblical accounts of Jesus facing his accusers. "Forgive my intrusion," Michael said, approaching Jonathan and Sarah on the sidewalk, illuminated by the city's iconic lights. "But I felt compelled to say that what you did in there was truly extraordinary. It was a perfect demonstration of Christian love in action." Jonathan turned with genuine curiosity, interested in who had cared enough to follow them out of a warm restaurant into the cool Los Angeles night. "I'm Pastor Michael Davis from Grace Baptist Church," he continued, extending his hand with genuine warmth. "And I must honestly say that your response to that unjust situation vividly reminded me of someone very special we often read about." Sarah gratefully clutched Jonathan's arm, still trembling not only from the chill, but from the emotional intensity of the confrontation she had just experienced. "Wait a moment," Michael said, studying Jonathan's face more intently under the street lamp. You're Jonathan Roumie, aren't you? The actor who plays Jesus in The Chosen." The question hung in the air between them, laden with the weight of the realization that the gentle stranger who had been unjustly expelled from the restaurant was in fact the actor who had so convincingly brought Christ to life for millions of viewers around the globe. Jonathan nodded humbly, his expression conveying genuine embarrassment, as if being recognized at that particular moment felt somehow unsuited or improper given the distressing circumstances. "You're Jonathan Roumie, aren't you? The actor who plays Jesus in The Chosen." The question hung in the air between them, laden with the weight of the realization that the gentle stranger who had been unjustly expelled from the restaurant, was in fact the actor who had so convincingly brought Christ to life for millions of viewers around the globe. Jonathan nodded humbly, his expression conveying genuine embarrassment, as if being recognized at that particular moment felt somehow unsuited or improper given the distressing circumstances. The profound irony of the situation settled upon both men like a divine revelation. The man who portrayed the Prince of Peace, the one who taught about loving the marginalized, had just been rejected and expelled for demonstrating precisely the compassion his character embodied. "My God," Michael whispered, his voice imbued with reverence and astonishment. "The irony is certainly not lost on me. The man who brought Jesus to life on screen has just been expelled for acting exactly as Jesus would." Sarah looked on, bewildered between the two men, not fully grasping the complete import of the conversation, yet sensing instinctively that something profoundly significant, perhaps even sacred, was unfolding in this seemingly casual encounter. James Wilson emerged from the restaurant after having hastily paid his bill, leaving a generous tip. He had felt profoundly compelled to find the man who had touched his cynical heart and reminded him of values he thought he had lost forever. "Please excuse my interruption," he said, approaching the small group with a vulnerability rare for a Hollywood executive. "But I couldn't let you leave without saying that what I witnessed in there has fundamentally altered something within me." Soon, as if drawn by an invisible magnetic force, several other patrons began to emerge from the restaurant and join them on the sidewalk. Each expressed their personal indignation at the treatment Jonathan and Sarah had received. But more importantly, each seemed touched by something deeper, a remembrance of who they could be at their best. Meanwhile, inside the restaurant, Bob discovered his phone was literally exploding with incessant notifications. Someone had discreetly filmed the entire incident and posted it on social media with the caption, "Jesus actor expelled for helping homeless woman." The video was already being shared thousands of times, with comments expressing genuine outrage over the inhumane treatment of a vulnerable individual. His assistant Rebecca approached him, a look of profound concern etched onto her face. "Mr. Mitchell, we have a serious problem. The video is rapidly going viral, and most certainly not in a positive light for us." Bob watched with escalating horror and despair as the viewership numbers climbed exponentially. His meticulously cultivated reputation, built over years, was crumbling in real time, minute by agonizing minute. The comments were utterly devastating. What kind of heartless individual expels someone for aiding those in need? This restaurant should be ashamed of its very existence. I will never set foot in this place again. Total boycott until they issue a public apology. On the sidewalk, the group had organically expanded to encompass approximately 15 individuals, forming an impromptu congregation of touched souls. Pastor Michael had begun sharing insights into his church's extensive outreach work with the unhoused, while Jonathan listened with genuine interest and active engagement. "You know," Michael said, "my church runs a comprehensive feeding program every Monday evening. We are always desperately in need of more dedicated volunteers." "I would be delighted to assist in any capacity possible," Jonathan promptly replied, and Sarah nodded enthusiastically, perceiving an opportunity to contribute rather than merely receive. It was at that precise moment that the restaurant door swung open dramatically, and Bob emerged, appearing utterly transformed from the self-assured, authoritative man who had confronted Jonathan merely 20 minutes prior. His face was pallid, his eyes bloodshot, and his entire demeanor conveyed utter defeat and genuine contrition. "Sir," Bob called across the pavement, his voice cracking with raw emotion. Could you please come back? I need to speak with you." The entire group on the sidewalk simultaneously turned to regard him, astonished by the radical shift in his demeanor and appearance. Jonathan meticulously scrutinized Bob's countenance, discerning something that had unequivocally been absent before, a raw vulnerability intertwined with profound remorse, and the kind of humility that only arises from a complete descent from the pedestal of pride. "Certainly," Jonathan stated simply, without hesitation or preconditions, and began to walk back towards the restaurant, with Sarah and everyone else following like a silent procession. Inside the restaurant, which now felt entirely transformed, quieter, heavier with anticipation, more imbued with possibility, Bob turned to face the assembled group. I have committed a terrible, unforgivable error, he articulated, his voice quivering with the intensity of genuine emotion. I saw the video online. I saw how the entire world views what I did, and they are absolutely correct in their condemnation. He looked directly at Sarah, who instinctively flinched, still conditioned to anticipate rejection. Madam, I offer my profoundest apologies. You did not deserve to be treated in such a manner. No human being merits this kind of humiliation, especially not in a moment of vulnerability. Sarah regarded him with unfeigned astonishment, entirely unaccustomed to receiving sincere apologies from individuals in positions of authority. I built this establishment upon all the wrong values, Bob continued, tears now flowing freely down his face. I once mistakenly believed that success entailed excluding individuals I deemed unsuitable, when in fact it should have signified embracing everyone with dignity and respect. Jonathan slowly approached him, his countenance betraying no trace of "I told you so" or moral superiority, only pure compassion and unconditional forgiveness. We all make egregious mistakes, Jonathan stated with genuine tenderness. What truly matters is not the misstep itself, but what we choose to do from this moment forward with this newfound understanding. Bob's transformation was palpable and instantaneous, like watching glaciers melt under the spring sun. Years of meticulously constructed defenses, years of status-driven pride, years of fear masquerading as authority, all crumbled as he confronted the full reality of his actions and their devastating repercussions. I want to make this right, he declared, his voice steadily gaining strength with renewed resolve. Not merely today, not just this week, but fundamentally from this point onward, perpetually. He turned to Sarah with a vulnerability that astonished everyone present. Madam, he began, I would like to formally invite you, and anyone else experiencing similar hardships, to dine here every Monday, entirely free of charge. Sarah gazed at him in utter disbelief, tears of gratitude tracing paths down her time-worn face. And more than that, Bob continued, now looking directly at Pastor Michael, I would like to work intimately with your church to transform this into a permanent, comprehensive program. A sanctuary where individuals can come not merely for sustenance, but to be afforded the dignity every human being inherently deserves. The entire restaurant erupted in spontaneous, prolonged applause from the patrons who had remained to witness this extraordinary and unexpected resolution to the evening. Jonathan placed a paternal hand on Bob's trembling shoulder. This is the essence of true transformational leadership, he stated with profound sincerity, not merely acknowledging our errors, but actively striving to repair the damage and cultivate something superior. In the weeks and months that ensued, Sunset Bistro became renowned throughout Los Angeles not for its former exclusivity or elitist ambiance, but for its radical and revolutionary inclusivity. Each Monday, the restaurant metamorphosed into a communal dining hub, a sanctuary where individuals from every stratum of society could partake in a nourishing meal and engage in respectful discourse. Sarah transcended her role as a mere regular beneficiary, blossoming into a devoted volunteer, ministering to others grappling with analogous struggles to her own. Her metamorphosis was utterly profound, afforded access to amenities such as showers, fresh attire, and fundamental medical attention through the church's expanded programs. She reclaimed not merely her intrinsic dignity, but also her sense of purpose. Rebecca ascended to the position of assistant manager, her innate compassion and astute interpersonal acumen now being equally prized alongside her organizational and administrative proficiencies. Pastor Michael initiated informal scriptural studies in the restaurant's secluded private room each Wednesday, unfailingly leveraging the evening's transformative occurrences as a potent case study on applied Christianity and actionable benevolence. Bob retained a framed photograph of the inaugural communal dinner, prominently displayed on his desk, as a poignant daily reminder that every patron who graced his establishment bore a unique narrative of both aspiration and anguish that merited reverence rather than condemnation. Jonathan persisted in his endeavors across diverse cinematic and theatrical ventures. Yet the narrative of that pivotal Hollywood evening trailed him incessantly, disseminated by innumerable individuals who had been profoundly impacted by bearing witness to genuine grace amidst exigent circumstances. He frequently received poignant missives from total strangers who had encountered the narrative via social media platforms and were personally galvanized to extend proactive benevolence to others within their own communities, thereby creating ever-widening concentric circles of compassion, propagating far beyond the confines of a solitary Hollywood eatery. The unpretentious gesture of procuring a meal for a woman in exigency had burgeoned into a formidable catalyst for profound transformation that continued to yield copious dividends months thereafter, unequivocally demonstrating that God can utilize even the most seemingly insignificant acts of kindness to orchestrate the most monumental shifts in human disposition. The profound lesson from that remarkable night reverberates through the annals of time with crystalline clarity. When prejudice supplants compassion, when superficiality overshadows substance, we forfeit hallowed and unparalleled opportunities to serve as conduits of divine beneficence in a world ravenously famished for authentic benevolence. Should this narrative resonate with your spirit and challenge your preconceptions, hit subscribe for more astonishing accounts of faith's capacity to profoundly reshape lives in ways beyond conception. And do share in the comments section below. Have you ever observed divine grace utterly transfigure an individual's heart? Have you yourself been the recipient of such a profound spiritual metamorphosis? The world awaits your response, and eternity hangs in the balance with these hallowed, ostensibly minor choices we make daily.